Welcome to our ongoing series of lectures, dare I use that bad word, talks, disquisitions about the religions of the world. And we have technically left the shores of Hinduism and gone into Buddhism, but I thought in preparing for Jainism, it might not be a bad idea to dip back into Hinduism, parts of it that I did not really go into before, because there's so much like Jainism that one has to figure that these paths are all somewhat related. Jainism, like Buddhism, is not considered part of Hinduism, and you will really think that arbitrary once you see how similar Jainism is to Samkhya philosophy and Patanjala yoga, which are well within the Hindu family, and they are so similar. But of course, the deciding factor is that Jainism, like Buddhism, rejects Hindu scripture, and that's all it takes. Well, let's then get on to Samkhya and Yoga. Now, there are, as often, various ways of transliterating these names, but I guess I'm going from Mircea Eliade's work, and I believe he spells Samkhya Samkhya. I have seen it with an N instead of an M. And I guess you can take your pick, or you can just learn Sanskrit and not need to rely on such crutches. Patanjala, that is named after Patanjali, the founder of it, Patanjala, the name of the type of yoga, and you just substitute an I for that last A, and you got the founder. So most of what I want to say to begin with applies to both the Samkhya philosophy and yoga. Now, both have roots in the texts of the Upanishads, though Patanjali also wrote a set of yoga sutras that are more specific to his view, and it's not too hard to find copies of these if you want. Now, both systems posit that reality is of two basic kinds, which makes it, by the way, a kind of dualism. Sometimes dualism refers to an ethical dualism of good and evil. Sometimes it refers to a struggle between two gods. There's also complementary dualism between two opposing yet supportive forces, as in Taoism. But here we just mean dualism in the sense that all is not ultimately one, that there really are two distinct types of reality, and there always will be. So it's a metaphysical dualism. There is spirit and matter. Spirit is given the name Purusha, Purusha, which occurs in the Rig Veda also as the name of the primordial man who sacrificed himself in order to create the world, and the world was made from different parts of him. That is not the same myth, though one suspects there is some relation. Here we have an abstraction. There is Purusha, which is spirit in general, and Prakriti, which is matter. That's Prakriti. You're not missing anything by my not being able to write on a blackboard. You wouldn't be able to decipher it anyway. So Prakriti, Prakriti. Now, you look closer at the categories, you see that within the category of Purusha, there are many individual spirits, each one eternal, blissful, and unconditioned, that is, unaffected by anything, above any sort of influence. And yet, I'm going to completely contradict what I just said on one level. These Purushas have somehow been mired in matter. Matter by contrast, is homogeneous and unitary by nature. There's just a bunch of gunk. There's not many of them. Now, we will see that there are 3 different modes of matter, but even that only becomes differentiated once the 2 are mixed, once Purusha and Prakriti are mixed. And now, how did this mixing come about between, after all, completely alien entities? Well, nobody knows how, or even what kind of mixing it can be, because somehow this mixing, which ruins everything, is illusory. It cannot really affect the unconditioned, Purushas, because they are inherently free and immutable. Right, from their standpoint, really nothing has happened. The action is all on the other side from the standpoint of the Prakriti, because something very important happens to it as the repercussion of this mixing, this seeming mixing. The idea that what is wrong with the world is illusory is sort of common by now from Eastern religions, right? Well, the imprisonment of the spirits, the souls, whatever you want to call them, the Purushas, in matter is the only thing that gives our material world its order, its form. If all the Purushas were someday, somehow, to be freed, what would happen to the world of matter, of Prakriti? Well, that world would collapse back into an undifferentiated heap, and in fact, that's the goal. If any of you are conversant with Gnosticism, you will recognize this is virtually exactly the same idea. Was there some ancient dissemination of these ideas? There could have been. But again, the human mind is pretty much made the same way, and given certain questions inherent in the human condition, it's always going to churn out a few, the same limited range of explanations. So it may well be completely independent. And then structuralism deals with that. What is it about the structure of the human mind that causes it machine-like? What is the generative grammar, one might say, stealing that from Noam Chomsky, that causes theological ideas to appear again and again in different contexts? So who knows? But they certainly seem to do it. Okay, now I say that matter can exist in 3 modes once the Purushas have entered into it. Picture a placid lake, and then a lot of hail falls into it suddenly. Well, it's going to set up a lot of ripples on the surface, right? Well, picture something like that. Once the Purushas fall, so to speak, into the placid lake of raw Prakriti, things start getting churned up, and matter begins to differentiate into 3 modes, or gunas, as they call them, G-U-N-A. And let's just list a few characteristics of each. I don't know if there's any one best one to pick for a name, but the first one, let's call luminous intelligence. And that one is called Buddhi, B-U-D-D-H-I. Sounds suspiciously like the Buddha, right? Well, of course, you're right, that the Buddha is the one who is enlightened. And Buddhi is luminous intelligence, kind of consciousness, if not metaphysical enlightenment. At least it's, the closest thing to it. It's the conscious part of matter. So Buddhi is luminous intelligence. Then secondly, there is activity, motivation, and energy. Again, I wish there was one good word to cover all of that. And so activity, energy, motivation. Thirdly, there is obscurity or sluggishness or inertia. every material thing or entity takes its individual form because of the different proportions of each guna activated in it by an imprisoned purusha. If you've got a gob of prakriti with scintillating, living purusha in it, it's going to start the thing in motion, and there will be various, perhaps randomly proportioned amounts, shares of the three modes within it. This is all very much like some pre-Socratic cosmology, and seems to be Empedocles is quite a bit like this. All right. Was there a time when the universe was not like this? Probably not, but you can speak of it as a hypothetical before the beginning. You can kind of speak of a logical priority, though in fact there have always been these purushas activating prakriti. One can imagine, given the utter difference between them, a kind of logical priority in which they are separated. But there will be a temporal stage in the future in which they are no longer mixed together. And that's what you're aiming to do, and that will restore the equilibrium that we can imagine there theoretically would have to be of the prakriti, the matter. It's kind of like raw matter in Aristotle, very much so, in fact. Aristotle speaks of a hypothetical raw matter or prime matter. It's hypothetical, though, because you never really see it. It's always formed into something. You never behold raw matter. I mean, it's almost like thinking of whatever food you ate, digesting. But even that wouldn't be undifferentiated raw matter, because it would still be divisible into proteins and stuff like that. But it's a hypothetical distinction. One day it will be a factual if all goes well. Well, now, where does human consciousness fit into this picture? Human consciousness is actually material in nature, not spiritual. Now, we saw this before, right? Shankara, the monists, the non-dualists, said that your psycho-mental self, the one that appears on personality tests or in the mirror, or your self-conception, your personality, your likes and dislikes, your memories, this is all chemical in nature, which is pretty much what we think, right? I mean, I guess our difference in Western society is whether there is also some sort of a metaphysically different soul, but nobody really denies that there is a material part of consciousness because of the electroencephalogram, right? You can chart out the little firings in the brain that correspond to thought. So, I mean, at least there is that. There is a physical basis to it. I mean, maybe there's something beyond it. And of course there is in this, right? In Samkhya and Patanjali Yoga. There really is. There is the Purusha. But the self you are aware of, that you identify with as you, that is entirely material in nature, though that is not obvious. And what's going on is, this conscious self is indeed the highest human faculty, because of the predominance there of the buddhi, or the luminous intelligence. But even that is a type of matter, and what it does is to reflect Purusha like a mirror reflecting sunlight. The buddhi can recognize the imprisonment of the Purusha and seek its liberation. It has to be the material part of you that realizes the dilemma here, that, I am not the same as the Purusha. I merely am enabled to reflect it, and it enables me to reflect upon and experience suffering, among other things, maybe I should disengage and we'd both be better off. Well, yeah, that is the thing you need to understand, that people do not understand. But it is the material part of you, the booster rocket that will be ultimately cast away, that sees the need for liberation and might eventually be prodded and poked to the point of realization when you realize, yes, something is wrong here. I got to make a break somehow. It is not the Purusha that resolves the need to be saved. It is not the Purusha that feels discomfort leading it to say, I gotta find the exit, because it, remember, is untrammeled, unaffected. It is unconditioned. It does not know it is mired in matter, and in a sense that means it isn't, because it's not really affected by what is happening. Our ignorance is the thing that causes the mixing of the two types of reality to continue, that perpetuates the imprisonment of souls in matter. That ignorance whereby we fail to distinguish the buddhi, the highest, most refined form of matter, from the Purusha. It's a mistake that everybody makes, to think that their psycho-mental states, same thing as the skandhas or the aggregates in Buddhism, exactly the same idea, are the same as the true self, which these guys call the Purusha. Not the Atman, but it seems to me it's the same thing, basically, just different vocabulary. As long as we fail to make this distinction, as long as we think the psycho-mental pseudo-self is the same thing as the soul, well, you know what's going to happen. We are going to continue to be reincarnated in this world of matter, imprisonment of souls in matter, and subsequent pain and suffering. And how does that work? I mean, if we're on this treadmill, how does it work? Well, you already know. Karma and reincarnation. The deeds you do call forth their own reward and punishment, and as long as you haven't jumped off the treadmill, you gotta keep coming back to answer for your deeds, good or evil. But the way out of it is Gnostic. It is a realization that, hey, my soul is just a battery powering this flashlight, which reveals all too clearly the suffering that I wouldn't even experience. The buddhi, the lively, intelligent part of matter, I would not be suffering these things if I weren't enlightened by this battery within me of the Purusha. I've got to get rid of it. Again, the Purusha is not suffering, but because of the engagement of the Purusha with the buddhi is suffering. And they even speak teleologically that the world is this way, subject to this misbegotten mixing. For salvific purposes, it is this way, as if someone had designed it, though they don't think that there was any designer, but it serves the purpose of a wake-up call. It is everything you do, eventually, as Buddhism says too, bears the taint of suffering and collapses into real suffering and death and then more of the same. And you don't have a free ride or an easy time of it. Precisely so, you can finally say, hey, I think I know what's going on here. Right? So it will finally drive you to seek the separation of the two. I mean, inherently, metaphysically, they're already separated, but you've somehow got this misapprehension that you are the Purusha. Now, when everybody is enlightened, that's it for this world. It all sinks back into an undifferentiated chaos. Now, what does that mean for you and me? What's the payoff? This is where I start getting queasy, personally. Once we're liberated, human personality will be extinguished. But don't worry, they tell us. This is to be seen as a kind of super consciousness, not as oblivion. What? Again, the Buddhists say this, right? What is nirvana? Well, it's not individual survival somewhere, like going to heaven, no. But it's not just annihilation either, and beyond that, who can say, because, we're talking about a state of being that is not to be chopped up into our affirmations and negations. You can't describe it in any way. Just got to be better than this. It's the absence of craving and egotistical grasping and all that, and so no more suffering. What it is, we don't know. Madame Blavatsky flinched in the face of this kind of thing, too. She said she just could not accept the idea that the enlightened state is, as the Upanishads say, comparable to deep, dreamless sleep. What good does that do you, she figured. I can sympathize with that. But they say, you got to trust us here. You'll see. And I guess there's some reason to accept those assurances, because there are people that enter into these states in yogic or meditative trances, and they come out of it. They say, well, if that's the way it's going to be, after death, no more reincarnation, I'm packing my bags now. Sounds good to me. So this side of liberation, you can't really know what it is, just going to say goodbye to what's a bugging you here. All right. Does that mean, though, once you're enlightened, and this is a perennial question that came up in Buddhism too, do you just exit stage left? I remember there were these Buddhists that in the early centuries said, well, I don't want to take the chance of backsliding. Should I just kill myself once I've attained nirvana? And no, the Buddhist bigwig said, that's not right. Maybe you're not so enlightened after all if you're not afraid of it. But they said, and all these folks say, all paths of Eastern enlightenment, meditation say, no, you continue on in this latest incarnation, but in a state of mere witness. You have no worldly involvement, no individual desires or vested interests in it. That gives you a sense of impartial compassion toward all beings. So you're not disengaged in the sense that, you're not just in a cell somewhere. I mean, I suppose that's possible too. You might just keep meditating, but you could be out in the world helping people. But the idea is that you're just passing through this world. You are witnessing it go by. It's not anything you have a part of anymore. I mean, again, you could be active in it, helping people, right? But it's not like I have to justify my existence in this world. What is my destiny here? No, you've got that all settled. And it's just inertia. It's the remaining karma from previous lives that has to play itself out in this life. Somebody used the example of an old turntable where you've got a record spinning and somebody trips over the plug and pulls it out. Well, the music doesn't stop. The platter doesn't stop immediately. It slows down. Inertia keeps it going slower and slower, and it finally does stop. Well, that's the way it is in the latest life of an enlightened person. You see the world go by, as Jesus says in one of the Sufi sayings, this world is a bridge. Pass over it, but don't build your dwelling on it. Or as he says in the Gospel of Thomas, become passers-by. So that's what we would do in this life, and there would not be a next life. There would be no reincarnation. There might not even be any suffering in this life. At least some claim that once they have attained a state of meditative enlightenment, that they can distance themselves from the body to such a degree that they, again, just witness it as if it were happening to someone else. Poor devil. Tough luck there. Interesting. Now, how do yoga and Samkhya differ? Because all of this stuff they have in common. And in fact, a lot of this, as I've said already, they have in common far beyond the boundaries of India. Gnosticism is very similar to this in many ways. So is the Jewish Kabbalah. But in terms of just the cosmology, how it got started, well, I've already said it's reminiscent somewhat of pre-Socratics, but it's certainly like Genesis too. I mean, Genesis chapter 1 also. Right? Because what happens there? You have a placid sea, the ocean depth, the Tahom. And a mighty wind begins to blow upon the water to disturb it, or one could translate the Spirit of God, same in Hebrew. And once it begins to interact with the Tahom, the depth, well, what do you know? The reality begins to differentiate into matched pairs, light and darkness, water and dry land, then the various celestial objects, the earthly species, etc. Divisions and categories come out of a once placid ocean depth that is energized and disturbed and stirred up by the entry of spirit. Interesting. Very, very widespread, one should say. All right, so how do yoga and Samkhya philosophy differ? Well, Samkhya is Gnostic in the sense that one need only know the truth, theoretically. The cognitive acceptance and realization of the truth should bring liberation immediately upon its heels. This was the same expectation that followers of Shankara had. Once I get it, well, I've untied the knot, right? That ought to do it. But yoga says, nah, you can know it on one level, but it really has to settle in deep, and you probably need to transform your knower, your consciousness. And to do that, there are meditative and ascetical techniques that gradually liberate the Purusha from its material, psycho-mental states, layer by layer. So you got to do some surgery. You've just learned what the problem is, but it's like getting a medical diagnosis. Here's the problem, but what do you do about that problem? This kind of difference occurs all over the place in different religions. I think it's a psychological thing at its root. In Zen, they have debates over whether you should just wait for enlightenment or whether you can cause it to happen. Is it spontaneous or forced? In Protestant revivalism, they used to debate the Calvinists, saying that it's simply the will of God. When you get struck with experience of the Holy Spirit, whereas there's people like Finney and other Arminians said, no, you can bring it about. The Pentecostals and Charismatics, same thing. Is it the baptism of the Holy Spirit just going to hit you? Or can you go to the tarrying bench and wait and maybe for it to strike? Or can somebody coach you into speaking in tongues, as Marcos the magician did, according to Irenaeus? Who knows? Same sort of a thing, I think. Shouldn't it just happen? I mean, I think I get the idea. Well, maybe not. Maybe you do have to really apprehend it on a deeper level, and that's where yoga, the yoke, the discipline comes in. And I suppose this is compatible with different types of yoga, but especially it's associated with the Raja Yoga, the royal path, which is not unlike the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. Samkhya also emphasizes that desire is the thing that keeps in reincarnation going. Apparently in Patanjali's yoga, that is not so important. It's just the ignorance. If you really understood what was going on, you would not desire more of this world and life in it, whereas Samkhya says, well, maybe one reason that merely knowing the truth doesn't do the trick is that you still desire the experience, just like this guy in the Matrix that knows damn well that the life he left behind in the apparently normal 20th century, 21st century world is an illusion, but he prefers it to the harsh reality after he's taken the red pill, and he wants to go back Well, maybe desire is operative, and Buddhism may have derived that element from Samkhya. Well, here, it's not just a technique or whether or not you need a technique. There is another difference, though this one is kind of squishy. This is a little hard to pin down. Over the question of atheism, Samkhya, on the whole, and I guess officially, could be said to be atheistic. You don't have a God, even though your soul, your Purusha, is an individual that could be described in divine terms, eternal, unconditioned, and so on. It's as if all the souls have the attributes of gods, but but there's no one God. There's certainly no creator. There's no savior or anything. There's some reason to think Eliade says that the oldest practitioners did believe in the gods or some kind of divine being, but apparently others, as in the case of Mimamsa Hinduism, saw that as superfluous and eliminated the middleman. So it's not theistic anymore, though it may have been to begin with. And with yoga, you got something just the opposite. Patanjali suggested that one choose some one thing to focus consciousness, and it might be Ishvara, the Lord, understood as one Purusha who had somehow never been mixed up in matter. One could meditate upon that as a kind of a homing beacon, but apparently this was just a conceptual notion. It wasn't really a belief that there was such a being, and yet a lot of followers of his have come to take the existence of Ishvara literally. So it's kind of interesting. Samkhya wound up atheistic, though perhaps it was not originally. Patanjali's yoga apparently was originally atheistic, but has become theistic or polytheistic or something. I guess you would say monotheistic, albeit deistic. Right? I love juggling those words. Deism means that there is a God, but God is not involved in any way. God is in a state of mere witness. Yeah, so there's a couple of differences, but they're not absolutely important ones. Now, the same thing is true with the notion of the chakras, the circles or wheels that run up and down the spine in yogic practice. Apparently, according to Eliade, who spent his whole life studying this stuff, unlike me, he says that the original practitioners and theoreticians of yoga did not mean to suggest there was actually some sort of a spinal cord with these chakras, these circles and nodes of psychic power. It was just something like biofeedback today, where you imagine that a certain brain wave has a certain color, and if you can read the color on a monitor, you can somehow get a handle on it and change the brainwave and all that, which, I mean, that's science, that works. That's, according to Eliade, that's what Ishvara was, and that's what the chakras are, and they knew that. Joseph Campbell understood it that way, I believe, when he said that the yogis understood the gods who lived in the chakras as being their own psychic powers. They're not actually gods that are somehow holed up in your spine. You're releasing them one by one. It's a way of talking about an inherent potential within you that can be unlocked. But today we got people who claim they can massage your chakras and realign them as if there were wheels on your car. I think that is, from the little I know of this, I suspect that's a misunderstanding, or at least a different view of it, a different version, let me put it that way. I remember once on New Year's Eve, my wife and I were with a few others at the apartment of Lynn Carter, a great fantasy writer and editor, and Lynn was getting increasingly tipsy. I mean, it didn't take much to get him that way any day of the week, but New Year's Eve, forget it. Well, my wife Carol is brilliant. She was explaining to Lynn that she gave yoga credence physiologically, that seemed like there was a way to get things done in the nervous system, but Lynn wasn't having any of it. He was just authoritatively, pompously saying, no, my girl, there's nothing to it, and it's all superstition. Well, I don't think he would have been that obtuse had he been sober. But again, that's the whole problem, according to yoga and Gnosticism and Buddhism, right? As Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, I took my stand in the midst of the human race and found them all drunk, passed out on the table. None of them had any concern about where he had come from or where he was going, and my soul grieved for the sons of men. But one of these days they'll snap out of it. Let's hope so, Jesus. So now I say this is all a kind of an introduction to Jainism. What is that? Jainism, Jainism. I guess you could be. I have a hunch you're supposed to say this Jainism, but nobody does, so I don't want to sound like a nut. I'll just say Jainism or the Jaina way, so you won't snicker at me. This is a very ancient Indian religion. We don't really know how old, though, because we can't be sure how far back it goes before Mahavira, who lived in the middle of was born in the middle of the 6th century BCE. That's a little earlier than Gautama Buddha, and you remember the problem there. Both religions claim that the one we consider their historical founder were really Johnny-come-latelys, that there'd been many, many more before them who did the same thing in earlier ages. There were supposed to be 25 previous Buddhas. Well, here there were, no, I guess there were 24 previous ones, in Buddhism, Gautama being the 25th. Well, the Jainism believes that there had been 23 previous to Mahavira. Very similar sort of a notion, a lot of similarities to Buddhism, to Gnosticism, to Samkhya, to yoga. And so how old is it? Well, who is this guy we consider the founder? Maybe just for want of knowledge of somebody that deserves the title. He's known as Mahavira, Mahavira, which you ought to know enough to break down into its components. Maha, the great. Vira, like virile, virility. Yes, the great hero. Mahavira, the great hero. Now, you could name a kid that. Most names mean good things. But his actual personal name, we're told, was Vardhamana, 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 the prospering one. That was simply his name, but he came to be known as Mahavira. His story is very much like that of Gautama or Prince Siddhartha. He leaves a prosperous royal family to seek salvation, the end of suffering, and goes into asceticism to do it. But unlike the Buddha, he doesn't see a superior way and sticks with asceticism. And indeed, this religion is rigidly ascetic. It involves just all kinds of self-denial. And as I say, according to Jainism, there were these 23 previous heroes. They have a whole bunch of legends about Parsva, who was his predecessor. Did he exist? Oh boy, who knows? But at any rate, it's probably safe to say that if there was any distinctive contribution by Mahavira. Perhaps he just gave the religion its definitive form, but we really are guessing. Well, he and the 23 predecessors, mythical or historical, take your pick, are called Jinas, Jinas. The Jaina is the victorious one. So there are 24 Jinas. They're also called Tirthankaras, which you can spell Tirtham or N, take your pick, Karas, Tirthankaras or Tirthankaras, I've seen it both ways, which means ford makers. No, not on a Michigan assembly line, but those who make it possible for believers to cross over or ford the river from worldly existence to the farther shore of enlightenment and liberation. I always think of John the Baptist as a kind of a ferryman as he stands there in the water beckoning you to come off the shore of sin and to gain the farther shore of salvation. Same sort of an idea. And so these are the ones that have blazed the trail, to use an alternate metaphor. The 24 Jinas, of whom Mahavira was the last, at least in this world cycle. Get to that in a second. Now, Jainism is a whole lot like Buddhism in that it does not deny the existence of various gods, the traditional gods of Hinduism. You want to believe in them? Sure, what the heck? But it says that human prophets are greater, and again, this is just like Buddhism. The Jinas, after all, did what the gods could not. They showed the way to salvation. The gods had never died. They're too busy either having a good time to even know they need to be saved, though they do. They're going to have to be reincarnated as suffering humans to even realize they need salvation. And they're also spending their time answering prayers from dumb mortals like us, asking for a nice day of weather for a church picnic. All right, maybe these gods are answering your prayers. Go ahead and pray to them, but this really isn't the concern of salvation. It's just kid stuff. So maybe there are gods. Oh, the one exception, there really cannot be a creator god. There's this elaborate Jainist text that just goes into almost Kantian antinomies, showing how it just makes no sense to posit a creator god. It's very fascinating. But other than that, they say there might be gods. Sure, what the heck? That's just another life form, just another, like in Hinduism and Buddhism, another loka, another level of possible existence. Why not? This isn't really a theological statement. That is, it doesn't show an interest in the gods. Of course it doesn't. It's dismissive of them. But what you're really making a statement about is the cults of popular religion. They're just irrelevant to the attainment of liberation. Well, who are the Jinas then? I mean, they were human beings who showed the way, all right. Where are they now? I mean, are they some sort of ascended masters, to borrow the term from theosophy? Well, yeah, that's exactly what they are. They were human beings, individuals. They attained the liberation of the soul, and those liberated souls exist at the summit of the universe. They are not gods, though. Now, in a sense, again, as with the souls, the Purushas, in Samkhya, I'm not sure what differentiates them from gods, except that they're more like Aristotelian God. They are self-contemplating, certainly not wasting time worrying about the soap operatic antics of the human race. They're self-contemplating, and so they're not gods in any traditional sense. They're really just souls that have sloughed off material confinement, and that's what everybody could do, thanks to these guys showing the way. Now, what about their cosmology? As I said, this is so darn similar to Samkhya and Yoga. Again, it's just slightly different vocabulary. The universe is divided into two kinds of being. They're the living souls, the jiva, they're called, and the ajiva, non-living matter. I really don't think that is appreciably different from Purusha and Prakriti. I think it's the same thing, just different terminology for it. These jiva, like the Purushas, are infinite in number and by nature are blissful, unconditioned, and they make a point of saying omniscient. That's interesting to me. If you had a bunch, you had a plurality of these souls that are omniscient, I'm not sure where individuality would come in anymore. I mean, it's like, your omniscience, you would think, kind of knocks down all the walls of identity. But who knows? Maybe some of you who are omniscient can tell us. But they have somehow become mired in matter, namely ajiva, and their omniscience is lost. I do not know, to tell you the truth, have not read whether the Jainist thinkers raised the question of an illusory confinement. In fact, I suspect they do not, but again, I am no expert on this. I'll tell you why. They take the miring in matter quite literally. So let's say that the gleam is off the pearl. Omniscience is, one hopes, temporarily lost. Knowledge becomes limited and cloudy, and you forget the rest of you. You forget your omniscience. Your bliss turns to sorrow, and your actions in the material world create karma again. Good or bad actions bind you to the wheel of lives, samsara, reincarnation, and you remember why, right? You got to answer for what you've done, good or bad. But especially damning are actions of life-taking to destroy jiva, and especially such acts encrust one's jiva, one's life monad, as they say, with a kind of shell that prevents liberation. It's like you can't rise to the top because you are sealing yourself into a kind of spiritual cement overcoat. It's actually pictured as a karma body, a thickening chrysalis from which the butterfly may never emerge. So you're in big trouble here. If you want to just look at this psychologically, never a bad idea. I think you could think of Eckhart Tolle's fascinating book, The Power of Now, and he speaks of a pain body that we carry around with us, that we just will not let go. The dead weight of resentments and traumas and fears and beliefs that the bad things of the past must be repeated in the future. This is the pain body. That is brilliantly put, I think. He does a great job on that. And that, I think, is the psychological equivalent of this. But these guys seem to mean it as, I don't think they'd reject what he's saying, but it's, you are actually suffering the incrustation of karma particles, actually, with every bad deed you do, especially any deed that takes life. And that is no less serious because of reincarnation. The Bhagavad Gita minimizes the taking of life. What the heck? Krishna tells Arjuna, all the people killed on the battlefield are just going to come right back anyway in new bodies. It's no different, essentially, than changing clothes. Changing costumes between the acts of a play, but no, it's very serious here. I've spoken of the souls at the summit of the universe and the lokas and all that. Just to finish up the furniture of the universe here before we get into what to do to be enlightened. Jainists picture the universe in a few different ways, which implies none of them are supposed to be completely literal, obviously. Right? If you did that, there'd be no, you just have one and that'd be that. In Jaina scripture, sometimes the world is pictured as a vast hourglass, plenty of room on both ends for souls to ascend or descend to. Now, this one utterly baffles me, I will admit to you, but it's in the texts. The universe is three-layered. You've got a bed or mattress at the bottom. Below that, a lightning bolt. Above that, a lightning bolt, the Vajra, I guess, and above that, a drum. You know, I guess that might have something to do with thunder and lightning coming to the earth. It's tempting to think, but I do not know the relevance of the symbolism. Others depict it as a three-tiered pyramid, but I guess that's a bad way of saying it. Think of three pyramids. You've got one with the broad end on the floor, naturally, on the ground, and from its peak, you got another one balanced on its nose, its base in the air, and another one with its base against that one with its nose in the air. Now again, you got me. I am not sure exactly what that's supposed to be, except in a very general sense. Up there must be enlightenment, down there must be damnation, where the rest of us are in the middle. Perhaps the best known cosmogony of cosmology, I guess it would be, of Jainism would be that the universe is like a vast human body. We like that one especially in comparative religion circles, because that's like that means we individual humans are like the microcosm. The universe as a whole is a big us, the macrocosm. That one is actually not a canonical image. It doesn't occur in the official text, but it's gained ground anyway. I kind of like that one. Most of us in this one are around the waist, and the Jinas are way up there at the head, and I guess whoever the heck the demons are down there at the feet, which explains why mine ache, I guess. So, what about history? History is a series of kalpas, or unimaginably long ages, and each one of them is divided into two periods. One of upward progress, the other downward into decline. Things just get worse. We're in the latter, which explains a couple of things. Why there have been no Jinas to appear after Mahavira, which was quite some time ago, and not going to be anymore. We're in the decline, and why the Jainist religion is in decline population-wise. There's less than 2 million of them. Is it going to peter out and die? Well, yeah, they expect that. But it'll be revived in the next age. So, what the heck? No problem. Ultimately. That is an interesting piece of theology. What does it mean if your religion dies out? Does that show it was never true? Or was it true but just had a destiny? Yeah, it's interesting. Tillich deals with that in Volume 3 of A Systematic Theology. But let's not beat it to death here. What do you do to become liberated? Well, it's got to be by your own efforts, as in Theravada Buddhism. You can do it, and only you can do it. And there are some basic ethical prerequisites. One has to be honest. I guess that's no big surprise. One has to be unattached to worldly objects, and that might make you become a monk. Let me just tell you how unattached. Jainist monks are divided into two groups, the Digambara and the Śvētāmbara, which means the sky-clad and the white-clad. Sky-clad? In other words, the unclad. They go around naked like Diogenes supposedly did. There's this famous story where Indira Gandhi is sitting there with in an official meeting with this Digambara Jainist monk in the raw, strategically posed in a lotus position. Holy mackerel. This is the part of the job I hate. I'll give you eternal life if you can tell me where that line came from. Okay, unattached. Third, ahimsa, that's A-H-I-M-S-A. Nonviolence, you must make careful efforts to destroy no jiva. Albert Schweitzer was influenced by this. He took it very seriously, wouldn't sterilize his medical instruments, we're told. Jainist monks will strain water to make sure they don't swallow some little critter. Of course, when they started this, they had no idea about bacteria. They carry a brush to whisk broom to sweep bugs out of their path. They wear surgical masks, I guess, including the naked ones, so as to avoid breathing in gnats, not because of their own possible discomfort, but because of the gnats. Now, all types of Buddhism and Hinduism theoretically believe you should not take life, but these guys are just so rigorous about it that they're famous even in those circles. Also, you engage in meditation to get your head clear and restore powers of omniscience, which they believe could happen even in this life. And hand in hand with that is asceticism. That is self-denial, mortification of the flesh, at which these guys are adept. One must be celibate. One must engage in sleep denial, social isolation, self-starvation to a degree. And you know how I said that some early Buddhists wondered if they might not be well advised to commit suicide before they backslid, if they had been enlightened, keep it that way, quit while they're ahead? Well, these guys do that. If you have become enlightened, what's the point of hanging around? You starve yourself to death. And it's certainly been done many times over the years. The Cathari Gnostics in medieval Europe did the same thing, interestingly. This whole thing is so much like Gnosticism. I remember years ago I was reading about this, and I was reading about Gnosticism, and I said, boy, I just bet you the parallel is complete, and somewhere there was some time that there were Gnostics that drew the same inference. You might as well starve to death, and bingo, I read about the Cathari. Sure enough, the parallel was complete. The circle is now complete. So this is what the Buddha rejected. Right? He was studying with a bunch of ascetics, and he finally said, what the heck is this? It's just gymnastics. It's just physical display, albeit of a kind of a strange negative sort. This cannot be the secret to enlightenment. So that's why Jainism and Buddhism never got together, right? They have Buddhists do not think asceticism is that important. I mean, you're denying desire, but that doesn't mean you're going out of your way to make a sport out of starving yourself. But if you do these things in Jainism, you can shatter the encasement of karma, enabling the soul to fly up to the heavens, to the summit, where it will exist in a changeless, blissful state forever. No wonder this religion is in decline if you got to starve yourself, right? I know you're thinking that, but of course I'm only talking about what the elite do, the monks. Most people who believe in this are not practicing it. I mean, should that be any surprise? Isn't that true of all religion? There is always a kind of a high road and a low road, and here too, popular religion allows that lay people may, though they may not be liberated directly in their present incarnation, well, if they play their cards right, they can be reincarnated next time as monks. They will have the spiritual wherewithal. How are they going to get it? Well, they don't have it now, but nothing is stopping them from doing good works now, such as feeding the monks while they're still, working on enlightenment, and just living a good life. I mean, sure, there's a lot of things you can do to train yourself spiritually, so next time you will be able to go the whole way. The big thing is that Jainist laymen must avoid certain occupations that would inevitably lead to the taking of life, destroying jiva, such as being a soldier, right? Not much chance of doing that. I suppose technically you could just be a medic or something, right? that wouldn't be that'd be okay. But that's sort of a modern compromise. I bet they accept that though. Being a butcher, nah, no way. Being a fisherman, sorry. Not even being a farmer. I mean, technically, there are jivas in plants. There's this interesting scale that Jainists have come up with of greater to lesser sensed beings. They've got it all worked out as to what sort of degree of sentience a being has, so that if you take the life of one that is like a porpoise or a chimp, man, you're in big trouble. But even mowing the lawn gets you into trouble because you're cutting off living things. And you can hardly help it if you're engaged in worldly life. That's why you've got to retire to solitude to be a monk and really do the trick. But you should not take life at all if possible. Certainly avoid jobs. There's no Jainist hitman, right? There's no Jainist executioners. There couldn't be. And they tend to go into trade and into money lending, and that's why the Jainist community, though tiny in India, is pretty darn prosperous. And like Hindus and Buddhists, even the laity do not eat meat, do not drink intoxicants, and of course don't steal or have illicit sex. They're not bound to celibacy, but they can't have adultery. What do they do that is uniquely religious? Well, of course, they support the monks. Wait a second, how can the monks eat anything? I mean, wasn't it alive? Well, they just can't kill it. But until they're at the point of real omniscient liberation, they can't eat it without bad karma if somebody else killed it. Sort of like the Amish, right? Can't own a TV, but might come over to watch yours if Harrison Ford's movie Witness happens to be on. They also will venerate the statues of the Jinas, and you may have seen this on TV or in magazines where these huge statues of the Jinas, Mahavira and the rest, and one anoints them with various oils and other substances, and it's quite something to see, very spectacular. You're not worshipping an idol, you know, it's just a commemorative image, but, you know, devotion helps fill your mind with the example of the Jinas, which you would ideally like to follow. Helps you exercise a sense of non-attachment to worldly things. Now, the Jinas themselves are oblivious to this. They don't hear or answer prayers. They're serene and undisturbed, but, you know, that's a vacuum that isn't going to last very long, right? Popular religion is going to fill in that gap, and you bet. We have the addition, non-canonical, of course, unofficial, of a male and female deity, kind of a secretary or a helper for each of the Jinas who do answer prayers. I mean, you might write a letter to the president, you're not going to get a letter back from him, but some flunky will write you back. And the same thing here, the Yaksha, or male deity, or the Yakshi, will answer your prayers. So, not bad. As long as we get my answer, I guess it doesn't have to have the president's John Hancock on it. One thing I guess I ought to say about this is that in Jainism, as well as in Samkhya, Yoga, and so forth, there is the belief that as you ascend the ladder toward enlightenment, you awaken certain primordial powers that are latent in most human beings because of their obtuseness. And this is where you get these stories of yogis walking on water, reading minds, becoming invisible, having clairvoyance and clairaudience, flying, transmuting base metal into gold and all that. And boy, I say that coming pretty handy, right? But what's a monk going to do with that? Well, not much. And in fact, these things are just parlor tricks. No religion makes them that important. They say that's just shows you the godlike potential of human nature, but remember, you're non-attached. would have no use for gold if you created it. What are you going to do with super speed? Some of them say, win a race, what do you care? There's this scene in Marlowe's Faustus where Faust is known for being able to do magical feats, but he gets reduced to the level of a party clown. It's just not important. And indeed, they say it's just a distraction. Miracles are not important. In the rather lackluster movie Oh God from 1977, something like that, there's one really great scene where George Burns, playing the Almighty, is for some reason on trial, and I suppose it's like Kris Kringle in Miracle on 34th Street, and ask him to come up and do a miracle. And so he says, okay, can you give me a deck of cards? And he does some card trick. Now that is perfect. That's exactly the way these religions view genuine miracles. Really? What are they but card tricks? Yeah. Well, now I should like to jump to another religion. The last ones we dealt with presuppose the great Kshatriya reaction against the Brahmin priests. The sages of the Upanishads, Prince Siddhartha, Prince Vardhamana, who became Mahavira, all of these guys would have been Kshatriyas and would have renounced it and the devotion to the gods through sacrifice to go out and seek some other kind of interior path. Well, I want next to do two religions that are connected with Hinduism but reach out and are kind of bridge religions to the West. And I'm jumping out of historical sequence here because I'd like next to look at Sikhism. Or Sikhism, you could say. I've heard it both ways. Oh, I'm a Sikh, or I'm a Sikh. But since, again, people start snickering if you call it the Sikh religion, I'll just go with my preferred pronunciation. Anyway, Sikhs, these are the guys you see wearing the turbans. Who are the founders of the Sikh religion, or Sikhism? Well, there's one guy who's sort of analogous to John the Baptist, a man who would not be considered a Sikh, but whose poems, lyrical and mystical verses, were incorporated into the Granth, Granth, the great scripture of Sikhism. A man named Kabir, K-A-B-I-R. He is a medieval figure. He lived between 1440 and 1518 in the Common Era, or A.D. And by this time, of course, Hinduism and Islam are both well established in India. We're dealing with fairly recent stuff here. He was well known as a singer and a poet and a kind of mystical reformer. He regretted that Hindus and Muslims were so divided, as of course they remain today. And what is it that divides them? He figured it could be reduced to external religious forms. That is, not the substance, just the forms. So he condemned some of these. He condemned circumcision, practiced by Muslims. He condemned the Hindu caste system. He condemned idolatry. Of course, the Muslims would be cheering him on there. He believed in monotheism, like Hinduism, like some Hindus, like all Muslims. But then again, he believed in reincarnation and liberation. He founded his own Hindu sect. So again, he didn't, he regretted the differences, but he ultimately comes down as a kind of a Hindu, but he's an ecumenically very open one. And as such, he prepared the way for Sikhism, which also kind of, many people say it tries to unite Hinduism and Islam. I think that's not true. Rather, it tries to transcend the both of them. And that's to affirm them and to deny them at the same time. Like you're willing to admit they both are in touch with the truth, but they're both very wrong. Like the parable of the blind man and the elephant once again. These guys have all experienced the elephant, but only an aspect of it, so they're right in what they affirm, but they're wrong in what they deny, namely what the other guy has experienced. So anyway, Kabir has to be considered kind of a founder, but the real founder here is Guru Nanak, N-A-N-A-K. He lived between 1469 and 1538. So he was born 29 years after Kabir and lived 20 years after Kabir died. A famous statement of Guru Nanak: there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. He was monotheistic, he was born a Hindu, and though he is considered to be something else, right? Sikhism is not considered. Sikhs don't consider themselves Hindus, but the government of India does. We've had some violence over that. I think, again, if you want to ask what the dividing line would be, it would be fair to say, well, they don't accept the Hindu scriptures. They've been superseded by the Granth, so that would put them outside the pale. I think, it'd be better to say they are a separate religion. And yet we will see that most aspects of his message were derived from a very recent Hindu devotional movement. He didn't really contribute a whole lot that was new. According to the biographical legends about Guru Nanak, he had a vision of the heavenly throne room. God was seated there and offered him a cup of nectar and said, I am with thee. Go and repeat my name and cause others to do likewise. And so there is what's called japji, meditation by chanting Nam, meaning the name of God. It just means the name, but that substitutes as a name, just as Hasidic Jews speak of God as Hashem, the name. So let's go down a kind of checklist of what he believed. God for Guru Nanak and for Sikhism is personal and individual, like, God in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and like some forms of Hinduism. There are no incarnations or avatars of God. What about the Hindu deities? Well, they do exist, but, and maybe this is the ultimate tendency of what we saw in Jainism and Buddhism, their indifferentism toward the gods. Yeah, all right, they exist, but they're just creatures. They're high and mighty and powerful, but they're really kind of analogous to angels. So is there a Vishnu? Is there a Brahma? Well, yeah, they are, but they're really like angels. So that's a bit of a blow. That kind of reduced them to the asuras of Hinduism. But, it's the only way you're going to do it if you're going to deny that there are other gods. How about reincarnation and karma? Bingo, yes, Nanak accepted that. In fact, it would have been very difficult not to. That spans all the Eastern religions. It just seems like a fact of nature. I mean, if you believe what goes around comes around, you probably don't believe it as a religious doctrine. It's just a judgment about the way you perceive life working. They'd say the same thing. He accepted the notion of the cyclical creation and destruction of the universe. It would all happen again and again. Some people look at all this and say, so, Sikh theology is Hindu in its view of man, of humanity, but Muslim in its view of God. I guess you could say that. That's not a bad way of putting it. But it doesn't mean that he looked at the competing theology menus and decided one from column A, one from column B. No, he inherited a tradition that was already saying this. want to get a little deeper into that. Let's do that now. Let's pursue the theology and where we got it. So again, let me underline, he was not trying to fuse Hinduism and Islam together. I have read that in seemingly reputable sources, but a closer look by real experts, of which I am not one, reveals that not to be the case. His attitude seems to have been more a plague on both your houses. He was mystically inclined, and he felt that God was so far above religious symbols and conventions that both Hinduism and Islam fall far short of describing him. You could call God Ram or Allah if you want, but it really doesn't matter, because none of these things come close to God, describing him, even really pointing to him. So he's not trying to synthesize two beliefs, but rather to transcend both of them. Now, in this desire, he is showing his background influence from the Sant movement. Also, that he's influenced by the Nath movement, but especially the Sants. Let's stick with that. These people had earlier practiced syncretism. I mean, they had put together bits of different religions, as Nanak is often said to have done, but it's not quite the same ones. The Sant movement, S-A-N-T, had synthesized Tantric Hatha Yoga with Vaishnava Bhakti devotion. I'm not speaking in tongues. Vaishnava means Vishnu worshipping. The Vishnu devotional sects, Bhakti, remember from weeks ago, devotional yoga. And they seem even to have had some marginal influence from Sufism, which is not that tough to figure because that was originally a non-dualist faith of its own. Became a heresy and then toned down, a type of Islamic mysticism. So there is some Islamic as well as Hindu DNA in Sikhism. It's just not quite as simple as what one often hears, that it was Nanak who was trying to join them. His main contribution was to clarify the ideas that he got from the Sant tradition. So, as a founder, he's really, I suppose, more of a formulator, kind of like Martin Luther, maybe, or Mahavira, or some of these others. Now, let's get on to God. We've seen he's a theist. He believes in a personal deity. He speaks of the unity of God. God is one. He is distinct from the creation. So he's not a monist. Nanak is a monotheist, like a Western believer. But these boundaries can be overcome experientially, mystically, not ontologically. That is, in meditation you can get lost in the greatness of God and can see no difference anymore. That's going beyond Buber's I-thou distinction, which he claims is as far as Western religion can go mystically. No, you can go to a seeming union, but in fact you will be different. It's just the unity of love or something, but you will not be God at the end of the day, but it'll feel like it. Interesting. God is revealed in the creation. Now, naturally, inherently, God is absolutely transcendent of the world, unlike, let's say, in Ramanuja's type of Hinduism, where the world is the body of God, God is the soul of the world. No, not that way here. God doesn't have anything to do with the world in that sense. And yet he has revealed himself everywhere in the world. He has deigned to be present there, to shine out there, to be found there. But it's not like he's like a part of it somehow, or it's a part of him. One might say it is by grace, not by nature, that God is immanent in the world, everywhere manifest, not far from anyone. God is the creator, the sustainer, the destroyer. That's the Trimurti doctrine of Hinduism, that there is a God, or at least it reminds one of that, and the theory of some scholars is that Nanak, who certainly knew about that, flirted with it, but rather than speaking of three deities who were personifications of a higher divine essence, he thought of it, at least there's some evidence to think so, I mean, it's not that clear. He may have pictured a kind of modalism, one God who acts in these three roles. So that's still well within monotheism. God is sovereign. He's in control of everything. God is eternal. Always was, always will be. God is formless. So, the Sikhs reject idols. They reject avatars or incarnations. They even reject anthropomorphic language about God. It would have to be automatically misleading and deceptive. You just cannot describe God. And any attempt to with metaphor is just going to betray what you're trying to say. God is ineffable, cannot really be spoken of, and yet God is manifest. God can be known experientially, just not articulated rationally. You come out of your trance, somebody says, what was it like? You say, let me tell you how to get into a trance. They can't describe it. They can tell you perhaps how to experience it. I like what Paul Tillich says about revelation of the divine mystery. He says the mystery of being is revealed in that you can experience it, but it is not explained. It's not some equation that you have to fill in the blank or can fill in the blank. It's not like the dark side of the moon, where we just had no way until the Apollo program of knowing what was over there, though we had a pretty good idea of the kind of thing. It was a mystery, but only temporarily, not inherently. Yeah, darn it, if we could just get a look at that. And we did, and so it's not a mystery anymore. But even if you do experience God, the mystery is not cracked, it's not decoded. It remains a mystery. You experience it as a mystery. The mysterium tremendum. This is, it's this kind of thing. I am associated with the atheist movement and the humanist movement, but I do not like to join with Richard Dawkins and others that say that the subject matter of theology is sheer fancy, that it is nothing. It isn't just stupidity. It's a kind of philosophy that deserves respect, and I certainly do respect it. Interesting thing that has to do with theology, God toward us, is the notion of prevenient grace, which of course we have in Judaism and Christianity. That is, God, and Buddhism, God initiates the process of salvation. God calls us via the inner guru, as they say. In Western theology, would say the wooing of the Holy Spirit. But there is this voice within you that calls you toward God and toward salvation. But that's all it does. You're not predestined to it. And so that's the difference between predestination and prevenient grace. The grace that goes before, the grace that anticipates and clears the way, and so forth, but doesn't nullify free choice. Well, what are we as sinners? What is it we need to be saved from? What is the unregenerate state according to Sikhism? As sinners, we're stuck in the mire of death and transmigration. Remember? Reincarnation. Right. The way to be delivered from it, a la Buddhism or yoga, is mystical union with God. This inner call, they speak of the man, M-A-N, but, it's just a false cognate with our word man. The man is like the Atman, that's the root of it. sort of a combination of mind, soul, heart, and instincts. This is not really the Atman of Hinduism. It's a collection of components like Buddhism, but this is really you, which is true in Buddhism, some types of Buddhism as well, original Buddhism, right? That your psychomental skandhas are not an Atman, but then again, there is no Atman. Well, under sin, you, such as you are, the man, is affiliated with worldly passions and thus with death. The roots of our problem, the roots of our unregenerate state are self-centeredness and imagined self-sufficiency. You think you got all you need, you are all you need. Well, you're wrong, and this is why you're doomed. Then your worldly preoccupations make you focus on the fleeting and thus the illusory Maya world. Now, apparently Sikhism doesn't believe in Maya in a metaphysical sense, that it's an illusion. It's more like a delusion in Sikhism. You just have a completely screwed up sense of priorities and what's really going on, what's really worthwhile. You're stuck in illusion in that sense, and that's what you got to be saved from. Oh, that's pretty commonsensical, really. It's not that strange sounding, not esoteric. And so, the inner voice of God urges each of us toward union with God. God gives by grace the capacity to hear this call. Now, He doesn't give it to everybody, obviously, because, if He did, you'd have a lot more repentance going on, a lot more morality. Now, why doesn't He call audibly inside everybody? Well, we don't know. That's a perennial problem, right? In Pure Land Buddhism, we have the same thing. It's all the doing of the other power of Amida Buddha, but then why do some not seek Him? Or put it this way, why does He not cause everyone to seek Him? Bad karma. Wait a minute. I thought it was all Him, not us. I guess that's a problem. It just arises from what you see around you. And not everybody is signing up. Well, the gracious gift of calling is just the beginning. As I say, you've still got your own free will. You could refuse it. And even if you do accept the call and repent and engage in meditation, you're really starting a long process before you're ever going to be able to achieve final mystical union. Of course, all Buddhists, all yogis, everybody would say that. That's nothing shocking either. So how do you do it? What is the way of salvation in Sikhism? You recognize that man, that inner voice, that is calling you is the presence of God, and you recognize God around you or Nam, let's say, in the external world. Remember, God is available and manifest if you have eyes to see all around you, so you meditate on the divine qualities you see in the world. And this gradually cleanses the man, the inner self, and brings you into a greater accord with God's will, like you're practicing the presence of God, as Brother Lawrence says. So naturally, that's going to kind of change you. None of this has anything to do with the externals of religion, ritual bathing, worshiping idols, going on pilgrimage, any of that. Asceticism, don't forget it, there's just no point in that. And there are all sorts of hilarious anecdotes about Guru Nanak, how to get into trouble with believers in these different religions. Once he was in Arabia, I guess. He must have been in some Muslim part of Pakistan. And everybody was bowing down to pray in the direction of Mecca. And he conspicuously bows in the opposite direction when their prayers are over. The Muslims saying, "What do you say? Well, what do you think you're doing?" Shouldn't you be bowing toward Mecca, the Qibla, the divinely ordained direction for prayer? And he said, anywhere you point is the Qibla. And then they forcibly grabbed him and changed positions on the ground, but wherever they pointed him, Mecca, the whole city, uprooted and moved over the face of the earth so that he was always pointing away from it, like a polarized magnet. Of course, that's a heck of a tale. It's hard to even imagine that one as a cartoon. But the point is, it's like in the Gospel of John, the time is coming, and really is now, when you will worship God neither on Mount Gerizim or Mount Zion. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth, the kind of stoic rationalism in the Gospel of John. Once Nanak saw a bunch of guys in Sacred River stooping down and splashing up water into the air and in one direction, and he wades into the water and starts splashing it in the opposite direction. And they say, "Hey, what are you, some wise guy?" And he says, "Well, what are you guys doing there?" He says, "We're sending on water to our ancestors in the next world." And what are you doing? And he says, "Well, I'm watering my fields back home in Lahore." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He says, "Look, if your water can reach the next world, there's no reason mine shouldn't be able to reach another part of the country," and so on down the line, right? These external forms mean nothing. They're just superstition. They're just mummery. God is far beyond that. Is it really possible God cares where you go to worship Him? Now, I know there's an answer to that, right? Well, God's one thing, we puny, feeble humans are another, right? We might need the stage props in order to help us be mindful of God, right? So, I mean, there really is, I think, a good response to that. But that sort of rationalism is a point that needs to be made, or we're going to turn those helps into superstitions. Back and forth. Pretty good argument there. There have been various gurus after Nanak, of course, and one of the most important ones was Guru Govind Singh. Oh man, I love these names. Govind Singh, Govind, G-O-V-I-N-D, Singh, S-I-N-G-H, means the lion, and indeed all Sikh males have Singh as part of their name. Govind Singh lived between 1675 and 1708. He was a great reformer. He introduced into Sikhism the distinctive dress style, and his unshorn hair wound up in a turban. In Asia, at any rate, short pants, a dagger, and a bracelet. Now I guess they don't necessarily follow that in the West. I've seen various Sikh professors and cab drivers, and they're not dressed like in a Gunga Din movie. I guess it's not that important, because externals cannot be that important, right? The point of these things are sort of preferred symbols to celebrate the tradition, but I doubt if they would insist on them. A big thing he did was to abolish the caste system among Sikhs. You'd think that would have been dumped before, but he made the connection that that can't be right. Govind Singh also consolidated the Sikhs as a military community. They were originally pacifists, but when they started getting persecuted, they had to decide what to do. You can let this revelation die out by having us all killed? No, I don't think we will. And so they became a military sect, and as you know, they were greatly relied upon by the British in World War II and so on. Govind Singh took the big step and abolished the succession of human gurus. What else do they have? Space aliens? Angels? Well, no, by that I mean any human leader at all. He himself was the 10th guru, and what he said was, well, from now on, Scripture is going to be considered the only teacher. Sola Scriptura, as Protestants say, the Granth, again, Granth, in a huge book. I have just a nice selection of material from the Granth, but you can't get the whole thing. It is going to be considered henceforth our Guru, Guru Granth. It's called, or sometimes Guru Granth Sahib. This would be like if the Pope started the Protestant Reformation. It's as if the Pope said, you know, you don't really need me. As Brian said, you've all got to think for yourselves. From now on, the Bible's the only Pope. That's what you'd have here. That's what happened. Quite a change. What do you do in worship in Sikhism? Well, you attend festivals that honor great heroes of the faith. You not only read but revere the Scripture. It is carried, as in Judaism, in elaborate processionals. A room in each home is set aside for it. I mean, you might have a family altar. Hindus do. There'll be like a sacred room in their house, and they may go to no other temple. Well, same thing here. The Granth, a copy of it, may be set aside with its own room, and the family goes in there to read and recite it. There is a communion food in Sikhism. It's candy made of butter, flour, and sugar. I've been to AAR SBL meetings where in the vast supermarket of the book room, the exhibit room, sometimes ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, will have these goodies. Of course, they have quite a publishing program. Books, DVDs, all kinds of good stuff. And they sometimes will have plates of these delicious things that sound pretty much like this. And it's mighty yummy. And very enlightening, too, I should point out. Guru Nanak is said to have instituted this to ensure equality among Sikhs and eliminate untouchability, that is, the outcast status in Hinduism. Now, wait a minute. How come he didn't just abolish caste? Well, I guess it was the same thing in very early Christianity, where they seem to have made no attempt to abolish slavery. But they did make a big deal about the master and the slave being brothers, which is not nothing. I mean, you know, it'd be better to go the whole way and eliminate it. And eventually they did here, just as eventually Christians did. But I guess, you know, you're planting the seeds anyway by saying king or slave were equal before God. And there is even a kind of baptism ceremony for those who become Sikhs. A fascinating religion, a noble religion, seems to me. Easily confused with Hinduism, but not really. Again, it is very much like a kind of Hinduism. It is very much like the Sant movement, but it's really its own faith. There are a few other ones like that we will discuss, where some people consider the Druze religion part of Islam. I think that's a mistake, and they certainly don't consider it one. Is the Baha'i faith independent? Well, yeah, sure is. It came out of Islam, but it's not Islamic anymore. How come the Muslims persecute it? Well, oddly enough, just because of that strange half-in, half-out status. It's like they're saying, you guys don't have any right but to be Muslims, so we're punishing you for deviating from the creed, and yet it is our prerogative to do so since you haven't got a new revelation. As you say you do, you really are Muslims, so it's our right to give you hell. Now, I hoped to get into one more faith here. I wanted to get into Zoroastrianism. and at least I think I can do that in the time remaining. If we go over a little bit, I guess that's all right. I mean, we may not even have to, though. I do a monthly column called Zarathustra Speaks. It is, of course, based on Nietzsche's great classic, A Modern Scripture, Thus Spake Zarathustra. And I am fascinated with the historical and the various literary reincarnations of Zarathustra. Not only did Nietzsche revive him, but so did Rudolf Steiner. And what he did with Zoroaster or Zarathustra is extremely interesting, but that's another topic. Zoroastrianism, let me just spell it. Zoroastrianism, named for the prophet Zoroaster, Zoroaster. That's the Greek version. It'd be closer to say Zarathustra, as the Germans do, Zarathustra, but closer still to say it Zardusht, Zardusht, Zardusht. This prophet founded what would be, again, a bridge religion, and in my opinion, it bridges the East and West in a much more significant way than the way people say Sikhism sought to do. As I say, I don't think that was even the goal of Sikhism. It certainly wasn't the goal of Zoroastrianism, because there were historical developments no one could have foreseen. And yet, as it turned out, Zoroastrianism, or Parsiism as it's also called, we'll see why, it wound up bridging Eastern and Western religions to such a degree that if there had not been such a faith, I say, we would have no Judaism, Christianity, or Islam today at all. There would certainly be no Islam. There would probably, almost certainly, be no Christianity for it to have branched off from. And even Judaism as we know it would never have existed. And there might be some kind of Hebrew religion, as there was before Zoroastrianism influenced Judaism, but we wouldn't have the Jewish religion we have today by a long shot. And yet Zoroastrianism itself is an offshoot of Vedic Hinduism. I mean, we're going way back there. We're not talking about the Upanishads now or any of that. We just were dealing with people from just a few centuries ago, a moment ago, but now we're going way back in time. Now we're really going into the Wayback Machine and dealing with a much earlier breach. How early is not clear. Zoroaster the prophet, sue me, that's the way I first heard it and it stuck with me, but fill it in any way you want. Zoroaster was born somewhere in ancient Persia, which at that time included Afghanistan. I'm guessing he was more of an Afghan. His name means, well, there's a couple of guesses, a couple of etymologies. I have usually read that it's just a common name. He would have gotten in that culture. Owner of camels in good condition, or owner of fine yellow camels, same thing. But the other option, which is obviously a theological one and probably reinterpretation, is he of the golden light. I don't know, I do not know the languages involved or how you could possibly have such variant translations, but all I can say is that if his name actually meant he of the golden light, we got a real problem with the historicity of this character. That does sound like a divine title of some sort, but let's just assume that it was a plain old name, camel herder, sort of, again, not uncommon, right? All right, we have some idea of where he was born. The when is a huge difficulty. Classically, and even in many modern books, we read that he was born in the 7th century BCE. But that's probably a mistake. The historical records and the religious scriptures of Zoroastrianism are total chaos. They didn't do a very good job of keeping the library straight. And this date appears to come from the failure of Zoroastrian scribes to keep straight the date, what this date was significant for. Somebody said, I guess it was the birth of a prophet, but in fact it was the date of Cyrus conquering Babylon. Somebody just confused it and said, oh, it's a big date, I guess that was it. So that's really the only evidence that he was born that late. So that's kind of out. There's some evidence that he was born about 1000 BCE, which would place him around the time of King David, if there was a King David. But then again, there is also evidence that places him earlier than that, between 1500 and 1700 BCE. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, that would sure fit, given the Vedic connection. So it's sort of a mess. And again, you really have nothing but pious legends about the guy. That's pretty typical, though. But the legends are mighty interesting, especially from the standpoint of comparative religion. I love this one. On the day he's born, and some scripture implies he already existed in heaven as some sort of an angelic being and then came down to earth, right? I mean, they say that about everybody eventually. But when he did appear on earth, when he was born as a baby, the chief pagan magician of Persia, they were run by a whole caste of these guys, astrologers and magicians, the Magi, and the chief magus of Persia woke up suddenly and began to tremble, and because he knows that a child has just been born who will one day banish magic and idolatry. And sure enough, when he does become a prophet, his big uphill battle is against the entrenched class of the Magi. This is just like, you ever seen the Third Omen movie, The Final Conflict? I admit it's schlock, but I love it. I think it's got great eeriness and even a couple of interesting theological moments. But I'm thinking of the scene where Damien Thorne, the Antichrist, suddenly springs up, bolt upright in bed, and after hours of sleeplessness, he's in a cold sweat. His eyes suddenly spring open, and he knows that Jesus Christ has been reborn. And with every day he lives, the Antichrist's power will diminish, and so he has to do the old Herod the Great thing and track down the infant Messiah. It's really very fascinating. If you have a chance, get the DVD again and take another look at The Final Conflict. I'm admitting there's some hokey stuff in it. I'm a pulp magazine fan, so that doesn't bother me. I mean, some of it's pretty creaky, but there's some great moments in it, and this is one of them because it's genuine mythology. This is a genuine ancient mytheme. It's exactly like the scene of this guy, the head magus, Durasan, by the way, is his name, Durasan, the chief magus. And so Durasan starts his strategy. He's got to get rid of this kid. So he gets a hold of him and makes repeated attempts to destroy him, just like Herod. He has the infant Zoroaster, yet I hate to say this, is so horrible, he tosses him in the fire on the temple altar, the Agni sacrifice fire, right? But he's unharmed, just like in the book of Daniel, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Hebrew youths, are thrown into the fiery furnace. They don't even get a ban. Right? Same thing here. Then Durasan has the child tossed into a den of wolves, but they don't harm him, just like Daniel in the lion's den, right? I seem to think he even tosses him in the path of a stampeding herd of cattle, but they don't hurt him because they somehow know that he will become a champion of animal rights, which he does, and they steer clear of him. Then when he's out in the wilderness, 2 goats miraculously appear to feed him, just like Elijah getting fed in the cave by ravens. So God's got his eye on this one, right? You just can't get rid of this kid. Well, did any of that happen? Well, you be the judge, let me just say that. But again, interesting. Now, where does he get his revelation? How does he know he's a prophet? Why does he reject the religion of his ancestors? Well, you see, Zoroaster's father was a Vedic priest, and not in India, right? I mentioned to you how the Aryan horsemen had swept out of Russia, what we call Russia anyway, and down through the eastern Mediterranean and on into India. Well, their culture and their religion and their caste system had been deposited in Iran and Afghanistan on the way, and so the Vedic religion was alive and well there. And so his dad is a Vedic priest, and so is he. And he is performing a Vedic ritual. He's going down into a river with a cord about him, which stands for ritual purity somehow, and then he comes back up from the purifying bath in the river, and what happens? But the angel, the archangel Vohumana, appears to him, the good thought, that means, and he hands him a cup, a chalice, bids him drink, and says that he will proclaim the one true God, Ahura Mazda, which means the wise Lord, or Lord of Light. That is also known to you, no doubt, from certain cars. Right? The Mazda car, which is surely named for this. Ahura Mazda. A-H-U-R-A, second word, M-A-Z-D-A. Who is this God? A God not unknown to him. Ahura Mazda appears to be the same as the God known as Varuna in the Rig Veda. If you remember, Varuna was the guarantor of both natural and moral law in the universe. He had been the king of gods, as seems only appropriate, but his position was taken by the young warrior god Indra when Indra defeated Vritra in that universal ancient myth of the young god becoming king by defeating the dragon, just as in Canaan, as in Israel, and Greece, all over the place. But he was still held in esteem as a god. But remember how the Vedic religion and forever after, the system of lokas, the spheres of being or levels of being, differentiated between the devas, the gods, divinities, and the asuras, who were the old gods, the gods of the defeated Daza or Dravidian people. And the two were always fighting it out. Well, the gods of the second tier gods were called asuras, and Ahura is the same thing in the neighboring dialect. And so Varuna couldn't have been an asura in the original, but still he shares with them the outcast status, and that he had once been the king of the gods and had been turned out. I mean, he was still officially a god, not an asura, but somehow, and we sure don't know how this happened, what Zoroaster concluded seems to have been that the devas were not divinities, but devils. And they were, and any who worshipped them, that is traditional Vedic Hindus, were idolaters and demon worshippers. And so now you expect to hear that he took the Dravidian gods and made them into his gods, but no, he didn't do that. Apparently the only one was Ahura Mazda or Varuna, and maybe accompanied by another. It's somewhere along the line, Mithras comes into this, or Mitra. He was a Vedic god, a minor sun god, and had become the god of oaths and pacts. He would watch over both parties to any treaty or agreement or contract and make sure they kept up their end of it. He would punish them if they didn't, and he was an assistant of Varuna himself, remember, the guarantor of moral law. Well, so was Zoroaster a monotheist? Well, not exactly. He did say that this neglected, this disrespected God should be accorded number one status, but he or somebody soon brought in Mithras with him, and I think yet another one called Aryaman. It's just not that clear, unfortunately, and it only gets more chaotic, I'm sorry to say. But he wasn't exactly a monotheist, and yet he did turn out the Vedic pantheon. He did pretty much dump and demonize and stigmatize them. And here's basically what he put in its place, as near as we can tell. I mean, do we have any writings from Zoroaster? Most scholars think we do, that the Gathas, one section of the Avesta, is by him, but I don't know how anyone can determine that. It's really hard to tell what was written before and after what else with these texts. But according to what most scholars think was probably the preaching of Zoroaster, there was one high god, Ahura Mazda, who then gave birth to two spirits, the good spirit and the bad one, Spenta Mainyu, the spirit of good, of truth. It's S-P-E-N-T-A, Spenta, the word spent with an A on the end. Mainyu, M-A-I-N-Y-U. And the other one, Angra Mainyu, A-N-G-R-A-M-A-I-N-Y-U. Think of him as the angry one. I don't have any idea if that's a valid cognate, but it might at least be a mnemonic trick. He was also known as Ahriman. Boy, do I love that name. A-H-R-I-M-A-N. He is the evil one, and that name's going to stick, even though this is an early stage. These are good and evil spirits. But after the initial preaching of Zoroastrianism, there is a mixing with the faith of the Magi and their polytheism and the Vedic tradition, and so it kind of becomes corrupted and lapses back into Vedism until later so-called Orthodox Zoroastrianism from around the 4th century CE. I mean, we're really talking very late in the game here. The 4th century CE or AD. These guys established the most famous form of the doctrine, namely dualism. Now, I mentioned earlier this evening there are different kinds of dualism. Oh, here's a distinctive one. According to this notion, from all eternity there had existed two spirits, a good one and an evil one. But Ahura Mazda is now not the father of both, rather he becomes the good spirit. And at this point they call him Ormuzd, O-H-R-M-U-Z-D, which is obviously just a kind of contraction. And then Angra Mainyu, or as they now call him, Ahriman. So each of these is co-eternal. They were both always there. Neither was infinite. Each limited the other. But this dualism was not like that of Taoism, which of course we haven't discussed yet, where you have the two like pedals on a bicycle. They seem to be opposite, but they work together. No, this is downright conflict. I'm going to continue to refer to them as Ahriman and Ahura Mazda. I don't know if there was any one Orthodox preference for the names. In fact, I think this comes from a Michael Moorcock fantasy story I once read, in which a great tale in which Alexander the Great becomes a kind of an antichrist possessed by Ahriman, and Ahura Mazda gets all the good guys together to oppose him. Somewhere along the line, I just chose Ahriman as my preferred name for the bad one, and Ahura Mazda for the other. If you prefer Ormuzd, you can just read that in. Kind of like that too. All right, there is a rigidly programmed view of history here that seems to be unprecedented, but will shape all the religions to follow. A great book on this is by Norman Cohn, the genius that wrote such books as Warrant for Genocide, Europe's Inner Demons, and the absolutely fascinating The Pursuit of the Millennium. He also wrote Cosmos, Chaos, and the World to Come, which talks about the birth of apocalypticism in Iran. Oh man, what a book. It's just great, like all of his books. What a genius. Okay, these were the first to have a kind of dispensationalism, you might say, programmed sketch of what has happened and must happen in history. And they divide history into 4 periods of 3,000 years each. Most of it passed by the time they formulated. Okay, here's what happens during the first one. Ahriman becomes aware of Ahura Mazda and decides to attack. That is the way it is in some ancient types of Gnosticism. Darkness and light exist from eternity, but darkness only becomes aware lately of light and tries to destroy it. The light shines in darkness, the darkness does not overcome it, right? Well, Ahriman becomes aware of Ahura Mazda and decides to attack him, and that begins the first of the periods. It is a period of preparation for war. The war has not actually begun, but the arms race has. Ahura Mazda creates the void. Doesn't mean what it does in Buddhism. It is a kind of blueprint for creation. I'm not sure why they call it the void. Maybe because it is devoid of the actual material objects, yet who knows. Maybe it is a kind of womb idea, but he creates a blueprint of creation. Philo would call this the second stage of the Logos, the plan of creation in the mind of God. Now, what's going on the other side? Ahriman is creating his vast horde of demons. Give you one little clue right now. The elaborate demonology of Zoroastrianism is borrowed by Judaism, and then on into Christianity and so on. But it starts here. So 3,000 years, Ahura Mazda is creating the blueprint of creation, while Ahriman creates and no doubt trains his demons. The second 3,000-year epoch begins with Ahura Mazda offering peace. He's ready for war. Now, how could that be if he's just planned out the creation of the world? As we will see in a moment, the world is one big trap. It's a weapon. So he has been preparing for war. But he offers peace. I mean, he'd rather not fight him. But Ahriman refuses. And Ahura Mazda loses no time in attacking. What does he do? How would these titans fight? Ahura Mazda chants the chief Zoroastrian prayer. The power of it staggers his opponent and sends him into a coma that lasts for the rest of the 3,000 years. That is, the power of it is so manifest that in the mere chanting of it by Ahura Mazda, Ahriman recognizes his eventual doom is sure. Oh no, this I have to deal with. So he remains unconscious, sleeping it off for 3,000 years. And that means during this second period of 3,000 years, Ahura Mazda is unopposed as he leisurely creates the spiritual and physical worlds. The mythical character of this is as obvious as in the Genesis 1 creation account, where God is shown speaking Hebrew, right? He makes the world and calls it dry land, and seas. What, God speaks Hebrew? Didn't occur to them there was any problem with that. So here God is, and there's no human beings yet to pray to him, but the Zoroastrian prayer is around for God to use. And it doesn't occur to them. All they're thinking is, we know this prayer as a prayer of great power, so that must be what God used as a weapon. That's why we use it as a weapon, to drive away evil spirits. And it's obvious, right? The piety leads to the myth. And the myth is all about the piety, of course. That's the point of that. Well, what is the spiritual creation that Ahura Mazda makes? It is a set of 6 archangels, which he doesn't exactly create. He more like emanates them. These are personifications embodying Ahura Mazda's divine attributes. We've seen one of them already, Vohumana, the good thought. So we have, it's kind of like the Sephiroth of the Kabbalistic tree, the attributes of Yahweh externalized into semi-autonomous entities. That's another reason why it's a little tough to say whether this should be called monotheism or not. I mean, you're dealing with the kind of seeds of the Trinity here already. But they, once they're there, they're considered archangels or angel princes. There are many other angels as well. There is then the physical creation, in which you have 6 elements or categories, each of which corresponds to one of the archangels or attributes of God. The chief among them is Gayamard, the primal man. It's G-A-Y-O-M-A-R-D. Gayamard. He is the counterpart of Purusha in the Veda, or the primal man in Gnosticism, the man of light in Sufism, the son of man in Daniel. That's all the same basic character. And Gayamard, in all these cases, the primal man sacrifices himself to give birth to the world. This is an alternate myth to the combat myth, right, where the God defeats the dragons and makes the world out of them. Well, this is an alternate priest. That's like a Kshatriya myth. A warrior creates. Here is the priestly Brahmin kind of myth. A priest creates by sacrifice. Sacrifices himself. And that's how does the demiurge get the world up and working? As soon as he creates it, he kidnaps the primal man of light, tears him to shreds, and uses the light sparks to as DNA to give order and life to his creation. How does the world get here? According to the Veda, Purusha sacrificed himself and became everything, the castes, the world, the scripture. How does Gayamard do this? Well, as we'll see, he's going to get chopped in half by Ahriman and wind up forming the first man and woman who then procreate. So his death forms the human race. Let me just add a footnote here. I know I'm going out on a bit of a tangent, but I think it might be helpful. Some of you are familiar with Earl Doherty's fascinating books about the Christ myth theory. And Doherty says he reads the Pauline epistles as talking not about a historical Jesus who was crucified, but about a Christ figure who was done in by the heavenly archons on their turf, namely in a heavenly realm, not on earth. Where does he get that? Who says that? Is there actually a myth of a version of the Jesus Christ story that says that? Well, yes, Gnosticism says that. The sacrifice of Christ done in by the archons of this age happened at the very beginning of the world. Once Christianity assimilates this, it historicizes it and pushes it way off into history near the time of the Gnostics, so that it happened or the Christians, so that it happened on earth in the recent past, and the archons become earthly rulers, Pontius Pilate, Herod Antipas, etc. But the crucifixion, the sacrifice of the Son of Man by the archons happened at the beginning of the world, above the world. So Earl's view is quite well founded. This is not just some function of the theory that he has to hold to, that he has to plug in for the rest of it to make sense. No. This is definitely well founded in the myths of Gnosticism, because the primal man, the Son of Man, is somehow the same as the Christ Ion. So, all right, and it all comes out of this. It all goes back to this ancient Vedic and Zoroastrian mythology. I guess that's my point here. It goes way back. And you're beginning to see why I say that without Zoroastrianism, no Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All right, so these creations of Ahura Mazda occupy the second period of 3,000 years, and it is all a preparation for war, because he intends to use the world to lure Ahriman to his doom. Among the creation again are the Fravashis. That's a strange one. It sounds like some sort of an Italian dessert, I realize. But Fravashis. These are spirits that appear originally to have been something like Valkyries, warrior maidens who collect the souls of the dead. By the time we're dealing with Zoroastrianism, they've been mythologized even more, because they're a fusion of the Valkyrie idea with the spirit double guardian angel idea. These are counterparts to mortals who, however, do not yet exist. During this period of preparation, Ahura Mazda consults with the Fravashis and says, "Will you join me in the battle that is about to commence?" And they say, "Yes, sure we will." He says, "Well, this is going to mean you're going to have to be born onto the material earth I've just made, and in material bodies. Do you think you can stomach that?" I said, "Oh yeah, we'll do it." And so the result is the authentic idea of angels. I personally cannot stomach the use that is made of angels in today's pop religion, because there is such a fascinating and profound earlier doctrine of it that comes right out of this that I much prefer, because from this is going to grow the esoteric notion that everyone has a set of concentric bodies from greater to lesser grossness. The physical body at the bottom of the heap, then the non-material appetitive body, which lingers around after the death of the physical form as a ghost who cannot get enough of the physical satisfaction for which it vainly seeks in familiar places, and then various astral and psychic and soulish bodies or levels, each one attuned to one of the planetary spheres. And when one escapes this world at death, one strips off each level, each body, until one stands nakedly spiritual in the pleroma of divine light. And that highest body is somehow the man of light, the risen Christ, your own reflection, your spiritual twin, as Mani put it. That all goes back to this. Yes, it's your guardian angel, and it is also your spirit double, your higher self. The Gnostics and some other Jews and Christians had rituals called the ritual of the bridal chamber, in which you encountered your spirit double, the risen Christ or whatever. Endlessly fascinating. So profound. And again, you can have people scoff at this stuff, but I can't bring myself to do that. I think the guy that got his head on straight on all of this was Carl Jung, who didn't pretend that there were metaphysical worlds made of some kind of ontological cotton candy floating above us like floats in a Thanksgiving Day parade. No, but these things are all in the psyche. They're built in. They're hardwired in the mind, so that God and the archons and the ions are there in the furniture of the brain. And that things are happening. The process of individuation is happening as one encounters and encourages and cultivates these things. So there's great profundity, I think, that is in no wise incompatible with a materialist understanding of nature and philosophy. I hold up the flag for that. There are mysteries that that do not deny science and are parallel with the mysteries of the unconscious. And these guys are already describing it. Jung said that the first psychoanalysts were the ancient Gnostics. Bingo! You certainly get that impression from the great book, The Gnostic Religion by Hans Jonas, one of Bultmann's disciples. All right, so human beings are going to be incarnated. But that's not going to happen until the primal man is sacrificed. How do we get the other side of the fight? Well, during the whole 3,000-year period, the demons are trying to wake up their creator, Ahriman, but without much success. And finally, a refugee from Ahura Mazda's creation, oh boy do I hate to say this, their Lilith analog, the demon whore, as they call her, she starts murmuring in his ear all of her evil deeds, and this awakens him. It kind of reminds me of a scene out of Damn Yankees. I'll leave you to watch that and find it. And that does awaken him. And this leads to our third period of 3,000 years. I know what you're thinking. It seems like we've had even more thousands of years this evening with this talk. This is the actual battle. Ahriman attacks the new-made world of Ahura Mazda, the earth. It crashes through the dome of the sky. Of course, I thought that the earth was covered by concentric domes and so on, with the planets embedded in them. Once there, Ahura Mazda pollutes the joint, much as Saddam Hussein did during the first Gulf War when he created all these oil slicks. Ahura Mazda corrupts nature and covers the ground with his own creations, serpents and scorpions and creeping things. He makes the water salty. Of course, most of it is. It's undrinkable. And he kills Gaiamar, the primal man. But from his carcass, humanity as we know it is created. Very similar Greek myth, where first Zeus created Humpty Dumpty-like spheroid humans, each with two sets of everything. Some were double males, some double females, some male and female. But everybody was pretty lazy, and so Zeus decided to chop them down the middle, and the sundered halves would frantically seek out the missing half, as in the Ronald Reagan movie, "Where's the rest of me?" And that's why just as Genesis says, why there is sex. Having been divided down the side, you seek to regain that unity. Well, Gaiamard is pictured as a Humpty Dumpty character, chopped in half, but the two halves live and become male and female, and poor Ahriman had thought to prevent the human race, but actually caused it. So the sacrifice of Gaiamard, the primal man, creates our human race. All right, let me just say something else here about the creations of Ahriman. Once Clarence Darrow in the Scopes Monkey trial asked where Cain's wife came from and said, what, so he'd pull off another creation in the next county? Well, yeah, in this version they did. Not everything is the creation of the good God. Ahriman created some of this, and that's reflected in the New Testament. Jesus says in Luke, behold, I have given you authority over all power of the enemy. You may tread on snakes and scorpions and not be harmed. What's that? The creeping things belong to the enemy, not to God? Yeah, that's the missing piece, don't you see? The kosher laws of the Hebrews had to do with safeguarding their taxonomical categories. Couldn't eat a pig because it didn't quite fall into the cattle category. It had cloven hooves, but didn't chew the cud, which an edible animal must do. That's why you couldn't have lobster, because it wasn't a true fish. It lived undersea, but didn't have fins and scales, which a fish had to have. And so these things that were left out of the categories, you couldn't eat. You think to yourself, couldn't God have created? Well, why didn't God create it all neatly so that it fit into His categories? I think this is the hidden key to that Judaism lost. They originally would have believed that it was Satan or somebody else who created these things, these anomalies. That's what they believed in Zoroastrianism. They can't eat insects. Well, no surprise, because Ahriman created them, etc. So you can see a lot of influence, sometimes incomplete. Need I point out that the whole notion of Satan as an archenemy of God, absent from the Old Testament to begin with, where Satan is God's own deputy, that comes loud and clear from Zoroastrianism. And that's not all that does. Poor Ahriman is trapped. He's burst through the dome of the sky, but then he finds himself trapped. And so he tunnels down below to the nether world, which he makes his own. It becomes his home, but also hell, the house of the lie, of the Druj. And there he lurks with his demons. I'm assuming this is the origin of the idea that Satan rules hell, because you never find it in the Bible. You find it in the Gospel of Nicodemus. You find it all over the place. You find it in Milton, but it's never mentioned in the Bible. It says Satan is going into the bottomless pit one day, but Satan lives in one of the lower heavens in the Bible. The idea of him being in hell as the warden, that apparently comes from Zoroastrianism, borrowed even later than the Bible. And so he's holed up there. He knows that his doom is sure, because his encounter with Ahura Mazda has shown that he can't outwit him. He's nearly as powerful, but strategy counts for a lot. And sure enough, this dualism is headed toward monotheism. They believe that in the end, Ahura Mazda will prevail and will be the only deity. Ahriman will be reduced to nullity. But history as we know it is a contest between two gods, virtually equal, and they are slugging it out. Once it's done, dualists become monotheists. There will be only one God to believe in. Let's see. The fourth period of 3,000 years opens with the prophet Zoroaster. He teaches the Zoroastrian religion. He discloses all of this that we're talking about. And he makes it clear to everybody that the nature of life is to fight on behalf of Ahura Mazda, to strike blows on behalf of the good, and that every good deed you do, every right choice you make is a blow struck on behalf of Ahura Mazda. If you're heedless of that, you may easily do evil and damn yourself, but you are in the fight, whether you know it or not. You are embodying one of those Sravashis. This is what you were recruited to do, so you better do it. Don't be a traitor working for Ahriman. You're not naturally one of his foot soldiers. No, Ahura Mazda created you. So, the doctrine is known. Life is lived as an ethical contest, and this is going to happen until the end of this fourth 3,000-year period. At the end of time, we will have it all wrapped up, because the kind of messianic figure, the benefactor, or as they say, the Saoshyant, Saoshyant. There are variant spellings of that, but you'll recognize him. The Saoshyant, or benefactor, will come to prominence. He will be a posthumous son of Zoroaster. According to the myth, Zoroaster's seed survives as in a sperm bank in an unknown lake somewhere in Iran. And one day, a virgin will bathe in that lake and become impregnated with Zoroaster's seed hundreds of years later, and her son will be a Saoshyant. Some say that there will be three of them, begotten of Zoroaster's seed, one each of the 1,000 years in the fourth period, each needed to pull off some great victory. But at any rate, there is a final one, the final benefactor, a posthumous son of Zoroaster, though some identify him with the god Mithras, because he did become very big in Zoroastrianism eventually. Well, when he appears, the Saoshyant is given the task of preparing for the final judgment. It is his job to raise from the dead, that is, from their residence in heaven or hell, all of the dead of the past. Now, when people die, they wake up in their grave and are accompanied by either Vizarsh, the demon, down to hell, down to the house of the lie, or by a virgin who is beautiful and represents their own goodness, taken to heaven, the house of song, to be with Ahura Mazda. How do you decide which way you go? Well, you're brought to this razor edge bridge called the Chinvat Bridge, or Bridge of the Separator. It it spans a huge chasm. If you are righteous, it flips down so you walk over the flat of the sword easily into heaven, the house of song. If you are evil, it turns 90 degrees and you have to walk across the knife edge, and you're going to fall down into the pit. And either way, you will await the resurrection of the dead when the Saoshyant eventually comes. And then, how are we going to know who is saved? Well, one would think it obvious, because you've just been in heaven and hell. We have the same problem in the book of Revelation, obviously. If you go into heaven, what's the point of the resurrection? If you're going to be raised from the dead, what's the point of cooling your heels in heaven or hell? Well, this is a little more than just a declaration of where everybody's going to go. There is this purifying flood of molten lead that will encompass everyone, and it will purify everyone of their sin, because of course there are few people that are not somewhat sinful, and the righteous, who merely need to be purged a la purgatory, will find the experience to be a pleasant, warm bath in warm milk. But all the unrighteous, who don't have much left, if they get purified, it's going to seem like a bath in molten lead. And there's not going to be much of them left, if anything at all. So purified or destroyed, depends on how far gone you are. But you're raised from the dead to do it. It's going to take so long, and it's understood in such concrete terms that they say it's going to take some 19 years to get everybody up and out of the graves. Why not just say it happens instantaneously? Well, I don't know, but I think the effect, at least, literarily, is to emphasize you're talking about an actual physical resurrection of the whole stinking human race, something that could be a long process. I guess God could do anything, but this illustrates the scope. Now, suppose you're evenly balanced. Suppose you're lukewarm, you've never really done anything good or evil, or you're evenly balanced, you go to a kind of a limbo state, they got it all worked out. Do I need to tell you that the idea of the resurrection of the dead at the end of the age for the final judgment, and at the bidding of a messianic figure born of a virgin, comes right out of this? And without this, you got no Judaism with any eschatology, no apocalyptic, you have no Christianity. Maybe there would have been a guy named Jesus with some wise sayings that somebody would remember. Maybe you'd have a bunch of proverbs from ancient Israel. I doubt it. I don't think that there would be any Judaism, Christianity, or Islam without this religion. Now, how did it grow and develop? Well, we don't really know. The myth says that Zoroaster was sent by Bohumana to the palace of Prince Vistashpa, and that he gained entry and admission by producing a ball of fire in his hand, much like Moses' leprous hand proving to Pharaoh that God had sent him. He has a long debate with the Magi, beats him in argument, converts the prince, and so different things happen. Eventually the Magi frame him and discredit him, but he gets back in good with the prince by more miracles, so on. Who knows really what the heck happened, but somehow he did get the backing of some prince or king, and that began to attract people to it. And eventually his enemies, the Magi, just joined the faith and assimilated their ideas to it. And I guess, there's a lot of growth and evolution, but also a lot of bad record keeping. So it's very difficult to be sure of this. I guess I would just want to add to this that the theology, per se, went full circle. Having begun, we think, with Zoroaster's own preaching of Ahura Mazda as the father of good and evil subordinate spirits, then making him the good spirit and having a co-eternal duality, it seems to have then become what we call Zoroastrianism. Zurvanism. The idea that above Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, who are good and evil, there is this prior being eternal time, Zurvan. That's a later development, but in some ways it harks back to the original. So it's developed, and different people have had different ideas as to what stage came when. It's kind of a mess, but this is what most scholars think today. I want to say a word about the dualism and its interesting implications. Once C.S. Lewis pointed out a real problem with this, and I think it's the best insight he has in his whole book, Mere Christianity. He said, if you go with the Platonic privation theory of evil, as Christianity and Judaism and Islam have always done, you can explain what's wrong with wrong, what's wrong about evil. It's something good in its natural state that has gone bad. Bad is evil is the degeneration of what was good. It is not some sort of equal and opposite substance. And Christianity interpreted the Satan myth this way. And of course, Lewis is exactly right on this. That all right, there was a good being, an archangel Lucifer, that God created, so we don't have any problem saying that God is the author of evil. He created a good being. But, of course, a finite being, I mean, if you're infinite, you can't be created, so whatever was created had to be finite. So, a finite being exists in time, it is not infinite, it can go bad, it has to watch itself, it has to remain plugged into God, the eternal. If it doesn't, it can go rotten, and that's what happened to Satan, who just couldn't stop looking in the mirror saying, what a good boy am I. And so he went bad. And God didn't create evil, nobody created evil, it's not a thing. It's just a degenerative condition that can befall a finite creation, and unfortunately it did, and it's not God's fault. That works out pretty darn well. There's a big problem with Zoroastrian dualism, though, as Lewis points out. Why call one of them good and the other evil? Why use those predicates? Why not merely say, I got a battle going on for hundreds of thousands of years between in this corner, Ahura Mazda, and in this corner, Ahriman. What makes one of them to be preferred over the other? Why even use terms like good or evil? Oh, well, look at what they do. Ahura Mazda does good things. What makes him good? Are they just the things that he does? If you like them, I guess you could call them. What makes the one superior to the other? If they're both equally eternal and they're two of a kind, why not just say A and B? Why isn't it just the Yankees versus the Red Sox? I think he's got a darn good point there. It's hard to say why evil would be considered evil. You might not like it, but then again, you might. As Gilles de Rais said, evil be thou my good. Well, some people could prefer the way of Ahriman. Why not? If one is not a degeneration from the other. So this dualism has a big problem. I think Lewis is right on that. But, on the other hand, it also has a great value that Christianity and Judaism tried to assimilate, but couldn't quite bring themselves to do it. And that is the problem of theodicy. Well, the other one was too, having to square God and evil in the same universe. But dualism solves the problem, or tries to, if you frame the problem this way. Could God stop the evil in the world? If he could, why doesn't he do it? Isn't that evil on his part if he could do it but doesn't? Well, Zoroastrianism is in effect saying, yeah, that's right. We would rather have a concept of a God who is good but not all-powerful than a God who is all-powerful but not necessarily good. I mean, come on. An all-powerful God could stop evil. Why the heck doesn't he? But if you're a Zoroastrian dualist, you say, look, he would if he could, and eventually he will, but he's not the only horse in the race, he's not the only boxer in the ring, this is a real fight. He's powerful, but he's not all powerful. Somebody else has a big share of the power. He's going to win, especially if we do our part. But it's a real fight. God's will is not always done. But wouldn't you rather believe in a God who does what he can to defeat evil than just be on the sidelines? And so they say, yeah, we'll accept that. That's a bit of a sacrifice, but we'll accept that. We do not have an all-powerful God, but he is an all-righteous God, and he will win one day. Not bad. And sure enough, everybody has this idea of an ethical battle. Well, these people can say it honestly. They do believe it is a battle. Now, I say Christianity and Judaism tried to assimilate this. Well, of course they did by taking the Satan figure, God's prosecutor, and making him into the enemy of God. Satan, the adversary, just means in the sense of legal prosecuting attorney. Over in the book of 2nd Enoch, they start calling him Sathanael, adversary of God. That's the Zoroastrian influence. And this, you see, this became important as Judaism rationalized and moralized God. When they had a very vibrant, powerful idea that God is simply the source of everything. God is the mysterium tremendum. You can't characterize God. You can have God the source of good and evil. But once the prophets get into the thing and say, no, God is good, not evil, or you are evil, you better repent. That was a major step forward in moralizing religion, but it kind of truncated the idea of God, making it too understandable, making him a kind of conceptual idol. Because if God is now to be limited to the category of morally good, where the heck does the evil come from? You ever thought of that? Well, of course you have. And so Jews and Christians tried to go the Zoroastrian route and say, okay, we got an evil being here, we can dump it on him. But wait a minute. He was created good. How come God allowed him to go evil? Oops. Like, if he was independent and was there from the beginning, alongside God, that's one thing. You can't blame God. But if God allowed the angel to go bad, you're kind of back at square one. And they couldn't bring themselves to compromise monotheism by saying there had always been this Satan. There are other forms of faith like Manichaeism that will say that. They will restore the consistency of the thing. What else do I need to tell you? Just a little bit about the practices, some of them very odd. Zoroastrianism sums up its morality in terms of good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Didn't necessarily originally believe in loving your enemies, though. They couldn't. They were embroiled in fighting with them. In fact, Zoroaster came to a bad end once when he was doing the fire sacrifice in a temple, and a marauder out of the hills, and a bunch of them had invaded. One of them killed him as he was at his altar. Their ritual, a lot of interesting stuff. They believed in protecting certain animals. Dogs and cows wouldn't kill them or eat them. Others would. They, let's see. They want to protect the purity of the elements. That's interesting. Of course, that's a ceremonial cleanliness issue. They borrowed from the Vedic religion the idea of a fire sacrifice, Agni and so forth. The heavenly high priest, he was incarnate in the sacrificial flame. Well, they didn't believe in Agni anymore, but they did have the fire at the sacrifice. Must have reinterpreted it. And the Zoroastrian priests wear a surgical mask so as not to breathe into the purity of the flame and pollute it. They do not bury corpses, because that would pollute the element of the earth. Well, what do? Do they cremate them? Well, no, of course not. That would pollute the fire that devoured them. So what do? Well, the towers of silence. That's what you do. You build a great stone or wood platform and just leave the corpse out there for the vultures to pick clean. This was well known and borrowed of all people by the Tibetan Buddhists, who do the same thing. Only they are afraid that if they don't, the dead will return as vampires. Oh, isn't it fascinating? They're called Parsis, as I say, in India, because loads of them were persecuted and driven out of India when the Muslims took over. Out of Iran when the Muslims took over. Found sanctuary in India, where their ethnic origin was not forgotten, even though they were the same basic Aryan stock. In fact, Aryan and Iran are versions of the same word, the noble ones. They did find refuge in India, and they were called the Parsis. Yeah, those guys that came from Persia with their religion. I suppose by this time, the Vedic religion was no longer mainstream anyway, and so they weren't treated as enemies or anything, as they would have been had this happened long before. And they're a prosperous community there. Of course, there are plenty of Zoroastrians in this country as well. Still a vibrant religion. And let's see. Yeah, I cannot help thinking there is something else I want to include about them. Maybe I'm just wrong about that, but let me just reiterate that, we've got, I know what I wanted to tell you. Mithras, who, again, came from the Rig Veda and eventually became the guarantor of pacts and oaths and was an assistant of Varuna. He came along with Varuna into the Zoroastrian faith and eventually became so popular that he became the chief god of Zoroastrianism. Ahura Mazda served him, and this led to a break-off, a split, where Mithras had his own religion, not surprisingly called Mithraism. And this became enormously popular. It was also in Iran in New Testament times, and Roman soldiers stationed on the Eastern Front got a hold of this, and wow, they loved it. Here was a warrior god who had become a savior, and a lot of them got initiated into it. And then when their tour of duty was over and they went back to Britain or anywhere in between, they founded Mithraic or congregations, dug out grotto sanctuaries underground called Mithraea, and made this so widespread that even the emperor accepted it, and Mithraism became the official religion of the Roman Empire for a while. It was neck and neck with the religion of Isis and Osiris as the most popular religion in the empire when Christianity was born. And so it grew from Zoroastrianism in a very fascinating way. I tell you, I guess since I won't have occasion to mention this elsewhere, I should just toss this in as well. Thanks to David Ulansey, the great contemporary authority on Mithraism, he discovered what led to the formation officially of Mithraism as a separate religion when Zoroastrianism was still going strong. He said that the astronomers of Tarsus in Cilicia, where Paul was ostensibly from, discovered the precession of the equinox, that the Earth was, the axis had shifted from Taurus to Perseus, from the bull to the warrior, the demigod. And they said, well, that means an age has changed. We've gone from one era to another. And they combined the Greek Perseus with the Iranian Mithras in honor of their own emperor, Mithridates. So the immediate reference was to him, but since he was named for the god Mithras, they combined the god Mithras with demigod Perseus and created a mytheme based on the succession of ages marked by constellations. The saving event was wrought by the warrior Mithras killing the Taurus, the bull, by breaking its neck and renewing nature through it somehow. And that meant that we had passed from the age of Taurus to the age of Perseus or Mithras. this religion was popularized by pirates from Cilicia, who were patronized and supported by Mithridates.